Hello there. Um, if you watch my videos regularly, you've noticed that some of them are quite critical and they're highlighting problems with society. Um, that's not to mean that I have no hope for the future. Um, I think these are problems that need to be solved mostly. So the reason for highlighting them is not just to be negative, but to try to spread awareness about things that are wrong with our society that should be addressed, that should be dealt with, should be improved. It's not to make people feel miserable or full of doom and gloom, although obviously too much negative information can make you feel that way and feel hopeless and depressed at times. That's not what I'm trying to do here. What I'm trying to do is to alert people to things that are a problem. I do think we have amazing potential, that we've always had amazing potential as a species. If you look at human history, you can see that we've actually been quite advanced in the past. We've had moments where we've slipped into dark ages and then eventually re-emerged from them. There's a sort of false history being put about, or has been put about for a long time, that ancient people were unsophisticated and that there's some kind of sort of linear upwards trajectory of humanity over thousands of years. That's actually false. That's not actually how it is. What's actually happened over a long period of time is fluctuations, big fluctuations. You had high points and then it sort of goes down and then back up and then down and back up and continues like that. Prime examples of this would be the sort of ancient culture in Turkey that has been discovered, which is going back to sort of 10 to 13,000 years ago. The sophistication of the architecture that they've found that's been buried in Turkey for all this time is absolutely shocking. So you can see this was a very advanced culture, and we don't really know what else they were capable of apart from creating temples and public spaces and sophisticated masonry that they could achieve. But then you certainly have periods where people have sort of reverted almost to sort of caveman-like status. You've got various periods in time. If you look at the ancient world in the bronze, what we call the early Bronze Age, you have these seven wonders of the ancient world, which are quite incredible. If you think about ancient times, you have incredible feats of building, which people struggle to achieve today. And you can certainly detect a more sophisticated level of building on the most ancient parts of some sites than when they've been built on at later times. You also have levels of technology that are very unexpected. There's been various finds over time which seem to surprise people, such as the Baghdad battery, which was used for electroplating apparently. It produced electricity. This is several thousand years ago. And it may have been used for that. It may have had other applications. There's been suggestions the ancient Greeks were able to produce steam-powered devices. Archimedes is certainly supposed to have created a prototype for such a device. There's various other things. There's been some astronomical devices made to such an incredible level over 2,000 years ago that were surpass anything you would have found in sort of medieval watchmakers. Sort of the clockmaking and watchmaking that emerged out of Germany and Switzerland was nothing compared to what they were achieving all this time ago. That's just two examples off the top of my head. There's all kinds of other examples of technological advances, such as underfloor heating and sewage systems, complex water systems, as far away as the Incas in Peru. Some of that's only just been discovered in recent years. So this idea that it's of a linear upwards movement it is false. We've had the potential for sophisticated and very civilized, complex societies in the past. Various things have gone wrong in the past that have sort of eroded that or destroyed it. The Indus Valley collapse would be one thing. The Late Bronze Age collapse. It's things like, for instance, a volcano exploding, which could create a huge famine because by blocking out the sun. The dust particles collect in the sky and literally block the sun out, and you could have, say, 1, 2, 3 years with no summer, and that creates a famine, creates a collapse of society. These kind of things can happen every few hundred years, and have done all over the world. The most recent disaster was in the 1800s, which caused quite a lot of problems in the 1800s. Well, that's a bit of an understatement. It caused a lot of deaths, I should say, which is very tragic. Obviously, some societies are more resilient than others and more able to cope with natural disasters or the effects of a terrible war, etc. But this idea that there's this linear upwards progress is false. I think if you look at ancient literature, if you look at the writings of the ancient Greeks, of the philosophers such as Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, the level of sophistication is quite shocking compared to sort of the bilge that comes out of people's mouths today, especially some of the so-called academics, which are just spouting complete and utter claptrap about social issues or political ideas. And it makes me wonder, are we really that sophisticated? You look at some of the Romans as well. The Greeks tended to look down on the Romans supposedly as sort of intellectually inferior, but you look at the works of Cicero or Marcus Aurelius and people like that. These were people who thought deeply about life and civilization and existence. And you look at the Chinese as well. Their ancient philosophy comes from going back thousands of years. So in different parts of the world, you've had very sophisticated societies, not just concerned with commerce and money, but concerned with advancement, with human knowledge, with progression, with ideas such as the soul, the meaning of life, the purpose of existence, how to be a better people, how to create a better society. Not everyone would agree with Confucius, but it was very obvious that his intention was to create a more ideal society. Some would say his ideas are way too controlling and perhaps too authoritarian, but while that may be true, the position he came from was one of trying to create harmony and order, rather than allow chaos to dictate events, because human society is fragile, and in chaotic moments whole civilizations have collapsed, empires have fallen, societies have fallen into decay and absolute destruction, which often has led to a backward slide, where in much of the knowledge that humanity has accumulated has been lost and has to have been relearned, in fact. Going back to the example of underfloor heating, that's something that's become popular in recent decades. That's something that the Persians and the ancient Romans were doing, 2,000 odd years ago, or even longer. Okay, they weren't using electricity or petroleum-based products to do that. They were just literally heating hot water and using that to heat the floor. But still, the very idea of it is incredibly sophisticated for the time, and people have been led to believe that these ancient peoples were somewhat savage. Okay, there was a lot of violence, that's for sure, but you do have long periods in many of these sort of societies where you had quite a long periods of peace. If you look at the ancient Sumerian Empire, even the Hittites, the Sumerians, they lasted a very long time, as did Egypt and arguably ancient Rome. The empire to the east, the Byzantium, that lasted actually a very long time as well. So in order to survive any sort of civilization, does need long periods of peace. But you could look at sort of modern Europe, and it's been very disorganized and not sort of working in a sort of homogenistic way at all. It's just been full of conflict and petty wars for centuries and centuries, which in many ways has held people back. You've seen a similar situation in other parts of the world, like for instance in Africa, where constant wars have set people back enormously. So in order for progress to happen, you ideally want a stable society without war. That's something we've yet to achieve. That's one of the biggest failings of humanity, in my opinion, is this inability to stop fighting. Obviously, people are going to disagree on things, but I think we would do better in a spirit of cooperation as opposed to one of conflict. We probably could have created almost a perfect utopian world by now if all of the money that has been wasted for thousands and thousands of years on warfare had been spent on advancement of humanity. Unfortunately, that competitive streakiness has been our undoing to a large extent. I still think we have the potential to achieve great things, and we are achieving great things at this moment, but at the same time, the direction of society towards a sort of technocratic, undemocratic, and authoritarian future is not the best use of our potential, in my opinion. I think part of that is the sort of competitiveness between different states, different ideologies, and it's not really serving humanity very well. I think all our energy, our knowledge, our spiritual, intellectual, scientific and creative potential could be much better used in trying to create a more balanced, more reasonable society. If you bear in mind, there's still people in the world that don't have running water, they don't have like a sort of constant supply of food, they don't have proper dwellings to live in, and at the same time you have someone like Elon Musk who's just been paid $1 trillion dividend from Tesla. Such a disparity strikes me as insanity. And there's no reason for that to be the case anymore. I'm not an advocate for communism by any means, but I think we could have a far more fair, a far more reasonable society with such a diversity of wealth, from absolute dire poverty to unimaginable wealth, just seems to me to be quite ridiculous. So I think human potential is there to be tapped into still. Most people, when they're given the opportunity to improve their life, uh, especially when it requires them to put in a little bit of effort, they will take it. They will grasp it. People who are in the gutter, give them a hand down to pull them up. They will try and pull themselves out with the help that you give them. Just throwing things at people doesn't necessarily really help them. If you offer to do everything for somebody, it just makes them lazy, generally speaking. Whereas if you offer to help them help themselves, that's very much a different matter. Where by actually being involved in your own development, your own help, your own improvement, then you've got a lot more investment in your own life. And I also think people tend to be more grateful than if you just throw things at them. It's a bit, you could say, similar to the idea of the welfare state, where you just give people endless benefits for the rest of their life. Most people will just take the money and remain in a sort of sedated state, not really making a huge effort. There will always be people who are in the gutter. Once they're given the smallest bit of help, will drag themselves up and make the best out of their lives. But I'd say for the majority of people who are in a difficult situation, the best thing you can offer them would be help that requires them to actually take some action themselves. It's like the old saying, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man how to fish, he can feed himself forever. So I'm very much of that philosophy. I think just endless handouts don't actually do anybody any favour. That in order to bring humankind up to sort of some kind of more or less equality in terms of level of wealth, level of healthcare, sophistication, etc., education, that you need to offer people opportunities, not just free handouts. You give people the opportunity to improve their own lives, and you offer them resources, etc., to reach their potential. You can't educate a person. People become educated by availing of the education. It's like if someone refuses to learn to read, you cannot teach them. If they want to read, and they will learn, and then some people become, sophisticated in their learning from having spent like a lifetime reading books, and become writers themselves. Other people with that same opportunity to learn to read, they just learn the basics. They might read a magazine, and that's about it. But ultimately, you cannot make people do such things. It's a choice, really, for every person. Some people, once you put a book in front of them, they love it, they fall in love with books, and you don't even have to motivate them anymore. With certain other people, they've no interest, really. You do well just to get them to learn the basics. So I think everybody's different. People have different skills. A person who may not have any interest in reading may have a completely different skill set that's equally valid in different areas. Some people who aren't academic in any way are brilliant with their hands, brilliant creatively. But in many cases they don't get to find out what their actual potential is, what their talent in life might be. And that's very much to do with the way that people are educated and the way that we are designed, if you like, to become slaves to the system, to just become, drone workers. You're not encouraged to spend time on figuring out what your talents are, what your own potentials might be. You're encouraged just to go and get a bit education and then go into the workforce. It's been that way for a long time. If we're going to progress as a society, some of these models that we use for human behavior have to change. One of them being the way people are educated, and the whole world of work perhaps needs to change. And I think the biggest thing that would make the difference is what I've already mentioned before, is warfare. The self-destructiveness, the waste of human resources, the waste of material, the damage it does to the planet, as well as to human society. I would say of all the things that have held us back, it is the constant warring over centuries and millennia. So I think we could eventually get there. At the moment we seem to be in dangerous times where war is a subject that comes up a lot. There are several major wars going on at the moment, and hopefully that won't progress into something more serious, but that is a threat that's hanging over humanity right now. But I'm hopeful that we will eventually reach a stage where national armies, etc., will become superfluous, and hopefully we can put our energies and our efforts into more positive things. So that's basically all I want to say on the subject, really. So, I mean, I will from time to time bring up negative things, problems that humanity is having to deal with. But I am hopeful that we can transcend most of our problems, if not all of them. And I'm hopeful that eventually we will evolve into a better version of ourselves. And not down this transhumanist route, but down the use of our own faculties, developing our own intellect, our own spirituality, our own intuition, and our own emotional and psychological lives. Because I think the other route is going to be quite disastrous for us. I do see a lot of potential, and I think we should all strive our best to encourage everyone else to bring out the best in themselves, to develop your own abilities, and try to make a positive change for the future, for our own sake and for all future generations ahead of us. So anyway, that's it for now. I'd love to hear from you if you've got any comments about what I've had to say, and your own thoughts on human potential and the future of humanity. So, and please, if you want to like the video, I'd be very grateful. And if you haven't subscribed, please click the subscribe button. I could always do with a few more subscribers. Thank you for watching, and that's it for now. Bye bye.